I never expected that a simple business decision, getting a new professional headshot, would completely change my life, but that's exactly what happened. It wasn't about the photograph in the end. It was about the man taking it, and the moment his hand touched my skin, pulling everything into focus. My name is Miles. At the time, I was a 28-year-old graphic designer, and my life ran on a predictable, well-oiled schedule. I worked from my small but tidy apartment, a place where the biggest variable was how my pothose plant decided to unfurl a new leaf. I had my clients, my deadlines, and my quiet routines. My days were a gentle hum of keyboard clicks, the soft scratch of a stylus on a tablet, and the low rumble of the city outside my window. It was a good life, a stable life, but if I was being honest with myself, it was also a solitary one. The loneliness wasn't a crashing wave. It was more like a persistent, low-level mist. It was there in the evenings when I'd cook a meal for one, or on weekends when the silence in my apartment felt a little too loud. I had friends, of course, but everyone was busy building their own lives, coupling up, moving forward. I felt like I was in a comfortable, stationary orbit while everyone else was charting courses to new galaxies. That's how life works sometimes, isn't it? You build a safe little world for yourself, and then one day you look up and realize the walls are a bit closer than you remembered. The need for a new headshot came from a desire to shake things up professionally. I was joining a high-end freelance collective, and the grainy selfie I'd been using for my online profiles, taken in my car 3 years ago, just wasn't going to cut it. I needed something that said creative, competent, and hireable, not just finished a burrito and has good natural lighting. So I started searching for local photographers. I scrolled through dozens of websites, my eyes glazing over at the endless parade of corporate smiles and sterile, white backgrounds. It all felt so generic, so soulless. And then I found his portfolio. Caleb Evans. His work was different. It had depth, a warmth that seemed to emanate from the screen. His portraits weren't just pictures of people. They felt like glimpses into their actual lives. He captured the thoughtful frown, the hint of a private joke in a person's eyes, the relaxed set of a shoulder that spoke of quiet confidence. Caleb himself was visible in a small photo on his About Me page. He was leaning against a brick wall, camera in hand, with an easy, disarming smile. He had dark, slightly messy hair that fell across his forehead, and his eyes, even in the small, compressed image, seemed to hold a genuine spark of warmth. He was, to put it mildly, incredibly handsome. And with that handsomeness came the familiar, internal sigh of resignation. He was the kind of man you saw in craft breweries with a beautiful woman on his arm, the kind of man whose life seemed as effortlessly curated as his Instagram feed. He was, in my mind, in a completely different category of existence. But his work was undeniable. I told myself it was purely a professional choice. He was the best, and I needed the best. That was the logic I presented to my own cautious heart. I spent an entire evening composing a simple inquiry email, rewriting it a dozen times to sound perfectly casual and professional. I hit send with a sense of finality, as if I were launching a message in a bottle into a vast, indifferent ocean. To my surprise, he replied within an hour. The email was friendly, direct, and efficient. He laid out his packages and his availability, and his tone was welcoming. There was nothing in it to fuel my daydreams, just clear professionalism. And yet, my heart did a little jump anyway. We settled on a date for the following Tuesday. And just like that, Caleb Evans went from a name on a screen to an appointment in my calendar, a fixed point in my near future that felt both thrilling and terrifying. The quiet hum of my life was about to get a little louder. The week leading up to the photo shoot was a masterclass in low-grade anxiety. What should I wear? I must have tried on every shirt I owned, scrutinizing myself in the mirror until my own reflection started to look like a stranger. Should I get a haircut? Was this tiny, insignificant mole on my cheek going to look like a monstrous crater under professional lighting? It was ridiculous, I knew. This was a business transaction. I was a client, he was a service provider. But my brain, stubbornly, refused to cooperate. It insisted on treating this not as a headshot session, but as some sort of high-stakes audition for a role I hadn't even applied for. Let me take you back to that Tuesday. The day arrived with a cool, gray sky, the kind that makes you want to stay inside with a cup of tea. It felt like the weather was mirroring my own internal desire to retreat. But I had paid a deposit, and more than that, I had committed. So I put on the navy blue button-down shirt I had finally decided on, the one that I hoped made me look artistic, but also dependable. I checked my hair in the mirror for the 10th time, took a deep breath that did absolutely nothing to calm my racing pulse, and left my apartment. Caleb's studio was in a converted warehouse district, an area of town where old brick and industrial steel were giving way to art galleries and trendy coffee shops. His space was on the 3rd floor of a massive, time-worn building with huge, multi-paned windows that I imagined would let in incredible light. The journey up the creaking wooden stairs of the building felt like an ascent towards some kind of judgment. Each step echoed in the cavernous stairwell, counting down the seconds to my impending awkwardness. When I found the door marked Caleb Evans Photography, I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the handle. This was it, the point of no return. I could still turn around, I thought. I could pretend I got sick, or my car broke down. But I didn't. I knocked. The door swung open almost immediately, and there he was. The photo on his website didn't do him justice. He was taller than I'd expected, with a lean build that his simple gray t-shirt and jeans did little to hide. His hair was just as messy and perfect in real life, and his smile was even warmer. Miles? Hi, I'm Caleb. Come on in. His voice was relaxed, a smooth, easy baritone that instantly put me on edge simply by being so calming. It was like my anxiety was a cat, and his voice was a gentle hand trying to pet it, only making it arch its back and hiss. Hi, I managed, my own voice sounding a bit strangled. Thanks for having me. I stepped inside, and my senses were immediately flooded. The studio was one huge, open room with soaring ceilings and those massive windows I'd seen from the street. The air smelled faintly of developing chemicals, old wood, and coffee. Canvases of various sizes were propped against one wall, backdrops were rolled up in a corner, and lights on tall, spidery stands were positioned in the center of the room. It was a creative, lived-in space, and it was intimidatingly cool. He gestured for me to put my bag down. Can I get you some water? Coffee, he asked, already moving toward a small kitchenette area tucked into a corner. No, I'm fine, thank you, I said, probably too quickly. I was trying so hard to be a low-maintenance, easygoing client, the kind he would hopefully forget as soon as I left. I stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, feeling like an exhibit that had been placed in the wrong museum. All right, he said, turning back to me with a friendly clap of his hands. So, we'll just start with some simple shots. The goal here is just to get you comfortable in front of the camera. Most people hate it, so don't worry if you feel a little weird. It's completely normal. He said it with such casual reassurance that it somehow made me feel even weirder. It was like he could see right through my carefully constructed facade of professionalism and into the nervous wreck huddled inside. The inciting incident wasn't a dramatic event. It was simply this, me, standing in this beautiful, intimidating room, with this beautiful, intimidating man, completely and utterly out of my element, and entirely at his mercy. We started the shoot, and it was every bit as awkward as I had feared, maybe even more so. Caleb directed me to a simple gray backdrop and had me sit on a stool. The moment he lifted the camera to his eye, I felt my entire body tense up. My shoulders crept up toward my ears. My smile felt like a painful grimace I had glued to my face, and I was suddenly hyper-aware of where I was supposed to put my hands. You know that feeling? When a simple act you've done a million times, like smiling, suddenly feels like a complex piece of engineering you have no instructions for. That was me. Just relax your shoulders, Miles. Caleb's voice came from behind the lens, calm and encouraging. Take a deep breath. There you go. I tried to follow his instructions, but my body seemed to have its own agenda. I felt like a puppet whose strings were being pulled by a very anxious and inexperienced puppeteer. The camera clicked, a sound that felt deafeningly loud in the quiet studio. Each click felt like a small judgment, documenting my stiffness for eternity. He took a few shots and then lowered the camera, a thoughtful expression on his face. He wasn't frustrated, not at all. He just looked like he was solving a puzzle. Let's try something else, he said. Forget the camera for a second. Tell me about what you do. Graphic design, right? What kind of stuff do you love to work on? He leaned against a light stand, his posture casual, completely disarming. He was breaking down the wall between photographer and subject, and I was grateful for it. So I started talking. I told him about my love for minimalist branding, for clean lines, and clever typography. I talked about a recent project for a local bakery that I was particularly proud of. As I spoke, I could feel some of the tension leaving my body. I was back on familiar ground, talking about something I knew and loved. Caleb listened intently, asking smart questions, his eyes fixed on me with genuine interest. He wasn't just waiting for me to finish so he could take more pictures. He was actually engaged. "That's really cool," he said when I finished. "It's funny. I used to be the same way whenever anyone pointed a camera at me. Absolutely hated it." He let out a small laugh. "My first ever photography class in college. Our first assignment was a self-portrait. I think I took about 300 photos, and every single one looked like a mugshot of a deeply unhappy man. I couldn't help but laugh at that. A real, genuine laugh. The image of this confident, handsome man looking miserable in a self-portrait was surprisingly endearing. "See? There it is," he said, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. He quickly raised his camera and snapped a few photos in quick succession. "That's what we're looking for." He showed me the small screen on the back of his camera, and I was shocked. In the picture, I was laughing, my eyes crinkled at the corners. I looked happy. I looked like me. It was in that moment, seeing myself through his eyes, that the first real crack appeared in my wall of anxiety. He wasn't just a technician. He was an observer, someone who knew how to find the person behind the nervous facade. We continued for another hour, and the atmosphere shifted completely. It was no longer a stilted, formal session. It felt more like a conversation, punctuated by the click of his camera. We talked about design, about photography, about the city, about the best place to get coffee in our neighborhood. It turned out we lived only a few blocks from each other, a little detail that sent a completely unnecessary jolt of something warm through my chest. At one point, he stepped forward to adjust the collar of my shirt, which had gotten rumpled. His fingers brushed against my neck for a fraction of a second, a fleeting, professional touch. But it sent a spark straight down my spine. It was a tiny, insignificant moment, the kind that happens 1,000 times a day between people. But in the quiet, charged atmosphere of the studio, with his attention focused so completely on me, it felt like anything but. It felt significant. It felt like the beginning of something, even if I didn't know what that something was. My initial perception of him as this untouchable, cool artist was melting away, replaced by someone warm, funny, and surprisingly easy to talk to. The connection felt real, and it was terrifyingly hopeful. The official part of the shoot was winding down. Caleb had taken hundreds of photos, moving me from the stool to a more casual lean against a wall, and then to a series of shots by the huge industrial window. The light was starting to fade, turning the studio a soft, golden color. I was feeling infinitely more relaxed than when I had arrived, actually starting to enjoy myself. We had found a comfortable rhythm, a flow of conversation and quiet observation. I was starting to pack up my things, a little disappointed that it was over. "Hey, wait a second," Caleb said, his voice soft but clear. I turned around. He had put his camera down on a nearby table, but now he was picking it up again, looking at me with an intensity that was different from before. It wasn't the focused gaze of a photographer analyzing light and composition. It was something more direct, more personal. "The light right here is perfect. Do you mind if I take a few more? Just for me, for my portfolio. No charge, obviously." My heart did a little stutter step. "Oh, sure. Yeah, of course," I said, trying to sound casual, as if this were a normal request. I stood where I was, feeling a new wave of self-consciousness wash over me. This felt different. The professional boundary had been explicitly dissolved. This wasn't for the client anymore. This was for him. He didn't direct me to pose. He just walked closer, his camera held loosely in one hand. The space between us shrank until he was only a couple of feet away. The air suddenly felt thick, charged with an unspoken energy. He raised the camera slowly, but he wasn't looking through the viewfinder. He was looking directly at me, his eyes searching my face. I could see the flecks of gold in his brown irises. I felt pinned by his gaze, unable to look away. "Just look at me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. And then he did something that made the air leave my lungs in a silent rush. He reached out his free hand, not to my collar this time, but to my face. His fingers were warm as they rested gently against my jaw. He paused for a beat, his eyes still locked on mine. as if asking a question without words. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he used his thumb to guide my chin, tilting my head just slightly. His touch was firm, but incredibly gentle. It wasn't a photographer adjusting a subject. It was a caress disguised as a correction. My skin tingled where his thumb brushed against it. The entire universe seemed to shrink down to that single point of contact, to the inches separating our faces, to the quiet sound of our breathing in the golden light of the studio. He held the pose for a long, stretched-out moment. I could feel the faint, rhythmic pulse in his thumb against my jawline. My own heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden, profound silence. He finally lifted the camera and took a single shot. The click of the shutter was explosive, a sudden punctuation mark at the end of a sentence that had been hanging in the air. He lowered the camera, and his hand fell away from my face, leaving a phantom warmth in its place. He looked at the image on the back of his camera, his expression unreadable. Then he looked back up at me, and for the first time since I'd met him, Caleb, the confident, easygoing photographer, looked just a little bit uncertain, a little bit vulnerable. He cleared his throat. "Okay," he said, his voice a little rough. I think we're good." That was the turning point. It wasn't a kiss, it wasn't a confession. It was just a touch. But in that touch, everything had changed. The line had been crossed, and neither of us knew what was on the other side. Leaving the studio was a surreal experience. One moment I was suspended in that intensely intimate, silent space with Caleb, and the next I was back on the creaking wooden stairs, the mundane sounds of the city filtering in from outside. The transition was jarring. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion and a dizzying, unfamiliar brand of hope. What had just happened? Was I crazy, or had that been as charged for him as it was for me? The walk home, which normally took me 15 minutes, felt like it lasted a lifetime and an instant all at once. I was completely lost in my own head, replaying the last few minutes in the studio on a continuous loop. I could still feel the phantom pressure of his thumb on my jaw. I could still see the look in his eyes, that flicker of uncertainty that had replaced his professional confidence. I analyzed every single micro-expression, every word, every silence. But here's the thing about overthinking. It's like trying to build a house on shifting sand. For every hopeful thought, he felt it too. He definitely felt it. There was an immediate, crushing counter-thought. Don't be an idiot, Miles. He's an artist. It was about the light. You were just a subject, a still life. This internal debate raged all the way back to my apartment. By the time I closed my front door behind me, the quiet hum of my life had been replaced by a chaotic symphony of hope and fear. The next 24 hours were excruciating. I tried to work, but I found myself staring blankly at my design software, my mind miles away. Every ping from my email sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. I'd grab my phone, my heart pounding, only to be disappointed by a promotional email from a clothing store or a notification from a client about a minor revision. Nothing from him. The silence was deafening. It allowed my anxiety to run wild, planting seeds of doubt that grew into towering weeds of insecurity. Maybe I had made him uncomfortable. Maybe my reaction, my wide-eyed, breathless stillness, had been too much. Maybe he regretted his moment of artistic impulse and was now trying to professionally distance himself. I cringed, imagining him telling a friend about the awkward client who read way too much into a simple pose adjustment. The thought was mortifying. I was an idiot. I'd built a fantasy out of a simple, professional interaction. Then, late the next afternoon, an email finally arrived. The subject line was simple. "Your photos." My breath caught in my throat. My hands were actually trembling as I clicked it open. The email itself was brief, polite, and thoroughly professional. "Hi Miles, it was a pleasure working with you yesterday. Your proofs are ready for viewing in the attached gallery. Let me know which ones you'd like for the final edits. Best, Caleb." And that was it. No mention of the last shot. No hint of anything personal. Just business. My heart sank. So I was right. It was all in my head. The warmth, the intensity, the unspoken question in his eyes. I had manufactured all of it. He was just being a good photographer, and I had projected all my own lonely hopes onto him. The feeling was a familiar one, a dull, heavy cloak of disappointment. I clicked the link to the gallery, ready to just pick my photos, pay my invoice, and try to forget the whole embarrassing episode. The photos were incredible. He had captured me in a way I had never seen myself. The laughing ones were genuinely joyful. The more serious ones looked thoughtful instead of constipated. He was a magician. And then, at the very end of the gallery, there it was. The last picture. The test shot. It was different from all the others. It was in black and white, intensely close up. The focus was sharp on my eyes, and the golden light from the window illuminated one side of my face. My expression was one of complete vulnerability, my lips slightly parted, my eyes wide with a look of unguarded surprise, and something else. Longing. He had captured the exact moment his touch had shattered my composure. Looking at it felt like reading a page from my own secret diary. He had seen it. He had seen right through me. And he had included it. Why would he include it if it meant nothing? The hope I had just tried to bury began to stir again, a stubborn, resilient thing. The tension wasn't resolved. It had just been given a new, beautifully rendered, and deeply confusing focus. I spent the rest of the evening staring at that last photograph. It was a perfect, agonizing piece of evidence for both sides of my internal argument. The prosecution argued it was just a great shot. He was an artist, proud of his work, and it would be a stellar addition to his portfolio. The defense countered that it was too intimate, too revealing. Including it was a message, a quiet acknowledgement of the moment we had shared. I went to bed that night more confused than ever, caught in a limbo of unspoken tension. The next morning, I woke up determined to be an adult about it. I would choose my professional headshots, send him a polite, businesslike email, and move on with my life. I had just finished drafting the email, my finger hovering over the send button, when a new notification popped up. Another email from Caleb Evans. This one had a different subject line. It just said, a question. My heart leaped into my throat. This was it. One way or another, this was it. I clicked it open, my eyes scanning the words frantically. The email was short, and its tone was completely different from the one before. It was hesitant, almost nervous. Hi Miles, it began. This is probably unprofessional, and please feel free to ignore this if I'm out of line. I've been thinking about our session, specifically that last shot. The truth is, it wasn't really for my portfolio. I mean, it is a good shot, but that wasn't the reason I took it. I had to stop and reread that sentence 3 times. My brain struggled to process it. He was admitting it. The email continued. I felt a connection with you that went beyond just a client session. I haven't been able to stop thinking about it, actually. I guess what I'm trying to ask, in a very roundabout way, is if you felt it too? And if maybe you'd be willing to get a coffee with me sometime, when I'm not hiding behind a camera. A wave of relief so profound washed over me that I felt lightheaded. It was real. I hadn't imagined it. I wasn't crazy. I was just sitting there, staring at my laptop screen with a grin so wide it made my cheeks ache. All the anxiety, all the overthinking, all the doubt, it all just evaporated in an instant, replaced by a giddy, soaring joy. I wrote back immediately, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I didn't overthink it this time. I was just honest. Hi Caleb, I'm so glad you wrote. I felt it too. And yes, I would love to get coffee. I hit send before I could second guess myself. His reply came back in less than a minute. How about today? In an hour. We met at the small coffee shop we had discovered we both frequented. Seeing him there, out of the context of his studio, felt both strange and incredibly right. He was sitting at a small table by the window, and he looked up and smiled when I walked in. It was a nervous smile, not his usual confident one, and it was the most endearing thing I had ever seen. The power dynamic was gone. We weren't photographer and subject anymore. We were just two people, meeting for coffee, both equally vulnerable. The conversation was a little stilted at first. We were both navigating this new, fragile territory. We made small talk about the coffee, the weather, the usual safe topics. But then he put his cup down and looked at me directly. So, he said, a self-deprecating laugh in his voice. That was probably the least professional thing I've ever done. I'm really glad you did it, I said, my voice quiet but sure. A look of relief washed over his face. Me too, he said. Honestly, Miles, I was so nervous to send that email. I almost didn't. He explained that he'd seen my design work online a few weeks before I even contacted him and had been really impressed. He'd hoped I would reach out, and when I did, he was both thrilled and terrified. The whole shoot, he confessed, I was trying to keep it together, to just be the professional. But talking to you, it was just so easy. And then, at the end, with the light. I don't know. I just took a risk. A good risk, I confirmed, a real smile spreading across my face. And in that shared moment of confession, all the remaining awkwardness melted away. We talked for 2 more hours. We talked about everything and nothing. He wasn't just handsome and talented. He was funny and smart, and he had a hidden nerdy side that loved old sci-fi movies, just like me. He was real. When we finally left the coffee shop, we stood on the sidewalk for a moment, neither of us wanting to say goodbye. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the street. "So," he said, his hands in his pockets, "I'd really like to see you again." "I'd like that too," I said. And then he took another risk. He leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't like the touch in the studio. There was no ambiguity, no professional veil to hide behind. It was a real kiss, confident and sure, but also gentle and questioning. It was a confirmation of everything that had been unspoken between us. When we pulled away, we were both smiling. The climactic confession hadn't been a single moment, but a series of them, each one a step out of the shadows of assumption and into the clear, hopeful light of mutual feeling. The weeks that followed that first coffee date felt like waking up from a long, quiet dream. My predictable, solitary life was suddenly filled with color and sound and, Caleb, we went on actual dates. We went to a museum, to a small independent movie theater, to that craft brewery I had once imagined him in, but this time, he was there with me. We spent hours just walking and talking, exploring the city, and, more importantly, exploring each other. Discovering him was a joy. I learned that his professional confidence was something he had built carefully over years of practice, a shield for an inner world that was thoughtful and sometimes a little insecure. I learned that he loved to cook but was terrible at baking, that he could name almost any tree by its leaves, and that he had a laugh that could make my entire day better. He was so much more than the handsome artist I had first seen on a screen. He was a whole, wonderful, complicated person, and I was falling for every single part of him. Our relationship developed with an ease that felt both exhilarating and deeply comforting. The nervous tension of our first few encounters was replaced by a comfortable intimacy. We fell into a rhythm that felt natural, as if we had known each other for years. My small apartment didn't feel so solitary anymore. Sometimes he'd come over and work on his photo edits while I worked on my designs, the two of us existing in a shared, creative silence that was more companionable than any conversation. About 3 months after that first kiss, I was back at his studio. It was a Saturday afternoon, and the light was pouring through those massive windows, just like it had on that first day. But this time, everything was different. There was no awkwardness, no anxiety. I was just there, watching him work, feeling completely at home. He put down the photo he was editing and looked over at me, a soft smile on his face. "You know," he said, "I still have that last picture from your session saved in a separate folder. The one in black and white." I smiled back. "The infamous test shot." "Yeah," he said, his eyes warm. "Sometimes I look at it, at the expression on your face." It was the moment I knew I was in trouble. He picked up his camera, the one that had once been such an intimidating barrier between us. He walked over to where I was sitting on the edge of his worn leather sofa. He didn't ask me to pose. He just started taking pictures, casual and candid, as I talked. He caught me mid-laugh, in a moment of quiet thought, in the middle of a rambling story. It was effortless. This time, I wasn't a subject. I was just me, and he was just him, and the camera was simply an extension of the way he saw me. Later, as we stood by the window looking down at the street below, his arm resting comfortably around my shoulders, I thought about how much had changed. My life was no longer a quiet, predictable hum. It was a symphony, full of unexpected notes and beautiful harmonies. All because I needed a new headshot. All because he saw something in the light. It's funny, isn't it? Sometimes you spend so much of your life carefully composing the frame, trying to control every little detail to project the right image. You think you know what the picture is supposed to look like. But then someone comes along and, with a single, gentle touch, pulls your chin into frame, and suddenly you see it. You see what was really there all along, waiting to be brought into focus.